my name is Ron Foreman. I'm with Imagine Performing Arts, and I'd like to welcome you to Imagine This. Imagine This is something that we're going to be doing monthly. I'm sure you've seen some of our other ventures with our open mic at Brian's Bistro. I'm sure you've seen one of our many plays that we performed. We also work with the youth and some of the programs with the Discovery Children, and of course we do a variety of other things with the community. And now for our first performance, Miss Edie Judd, who will be singing I Am Yours.
Well, you dumped on me and I bet you that I felt it. I tried to be chill, but you're so hot that I melted. I fell right through the cracks. Now I'm trying to get back. Before the cool done run out, I'll be giving it my best. It's nothing's gonna stop me but divine intervention. I reckon again it's my turn to win some or learn some, but I won't hesitate no more, no more. It cannot wait. I'm yours. Well, open up your mind and see you like me. Open up your plans and then you're free. Look into your heart and you'll find love, love, love. Listen to the music of the moment, people dance and sing. We're just one big family. It needs our God-forsaken right to be loved, 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 loved. But I won't hesitate no more, no more. It cannot wait. I'm yours. Well, I've been spending way too long checking my tongue in the mirror and bending over backwards just to try to see clearer, but my breath fogged up the glass. So I drew a new face and I laughed. I guess what I'm trying to say is there ain't no better reason to rid yourself of vanities and just go with the season. It's what we aim to do. Our name is virtue, but I won't hesitate no more, no more. It cannot wait. I'm yours.
Now our next performer is a gentleman by the name of Ian Kinder. Ian Kinder first did this particular reading, My First Deer, at an open mic that we did at Brian's Bistro. And we enjoyed it so much that we asked him to do it again. Ian Kinder.
For a first deer, there is no habitat so lush and fine as a hunter's memory. 3 decades and more of observation have convinced me that a first deer not only lives on in the memory of a hunter, but grows and thrives there, increasing in points and pounds with each passing year until at last it reaches full maturity, which is to say, big enough to shade a team of Belgian draft horses in its shadow at high noon. It is a remarkable phenomenon and worthy of study. Consider the case of my friend Wretch Sweeney and his first deer. Now, I was with him when he shot the deer, and though my first impression was that Rich had killed a large jackrabbit, closer examination revealed it to be a little spike buck. Now, we were both only 14 at the time, and quivering with excitement over Wretch's good fortune in getting his first deer. Still, there was no question in either of our minds that what he had bagged was a spike buck, one slightly larger than a bread box. So you can imagine my surprise when, scarcely a month later, I overheard Wretch telling some friends that his first deer was a nice 4-point buck. Now, I mentioned to Wretch afterwards that I was amazed at how fast his deer was growing. He said he was a little surprised as well, but was pleased it was doing so well. He admitted that he had known all along that the deer was going to get bigger eventually, although he hadn't expected it to happen so quickly. Staring off into the middle distance, a dreamy expression on his face, he told me, "You know, I wouldn't be surprised if someday my first deer becomes a world's record trophy." "I wouldn't either," I said. "In fact, I'd be willing to bet on it." Now, even though it violates the code of the true sportsman, I must confess that I still harbor unkind thoughts for my first deer. True to his form, and unlike almost all other first deer, he has steadfastly refused to grow either in size or in my memory or imagination. He simply stands there, his original size, puny rack, peering over the lip of my consciousness with an insolent sneer on his face. Here I offered that thankless creature escape from the anonymity of becoming someone else's second, or seventh, or 17th deer, or at the very least from an old age presided over by coyotes. And how did he repay me? With humiliation. Now let me begin by pointing out what I consider to be one of the great absurdities of all time. That a boy at age 14 is allowed to purchase his first hunting license and deer tag, but is prevented from obtaining a driver's license until he's 16. And this is like telling a kid he can go swimming, but to stay away from the water. Did the bureaucrats think that trophy mule deer came down from the hills in the evening to drink out of your garden hose? Well, the predicament left you no recourse but to beg the adult hunters you knew to take you hunting with them on the weekends. Now, my problem was that all the adult hunters I knew bagged their first deer in the first couple weeks of the season, and from then on I had to furnish my own transportation. Now, this meant that in order to get up to the top of the mountain where the trophy mule deer hung out, I had to start out at 4 a.m. if I wanted to get there by noon. I remember one time when I was steering around some big boulders in the road about 3/4 of the way up the Dawson grade, and a Jeep with 2 hunters in it came plowing up behind me. I pulled over so they could pass, and the hunters grinned at me as they went by. You'd think they'd never seen anyone pedaling a bike 20 miles up the side of a mountain to go deer hunting. I had rigged up my bike especially for deer hunting. There were straps to hold my rifle snugly across the handlebars and saddlebags across the back fender to carry my gear. The back fender had been reinforced to support a sturdy platform, my reason for this being that I didn't believe the original fender was stout enough to support a buck when I inevitably got one. My one oversight was failing to put a guard over the top of the bike chain, in which I had to worry constantly about my tongue getting caught. Deer hunting on a bike is no picnic. Well, a mile farther on, and a couple of hours later, I came to a camp where the fellows in the Jeep were busy setting up camp with some other hunters. Apparently, someone told a fantastic joke as I went pumping by, because they all collapsed in a fit of laughter and were doubled over and rolling on the ground and pounding trees with their fists. Seemed like a bunch of lunatics to me. Hoped they didn't plan on hunting in the same area I was headed for. Couldn't wait to see their faces when I came coasting easily back down the mountain with a trophy buck draped over the back of my bike. Now, one of the main problems with biking your way out to hunt deer was that if you left at 4 a.m, by the time you got to the hunting place, there were only a couple hours of daylight left in which to do your hunting. Then you had to spend some time resting, at least until the pounding of your heart eased up enough not to frighten the deer. Now, as luck would have it, just as I unstrapped my rifle from the handlebars, a buck mule deer came dancing out of the brush not 20 yards away from me. Now, right then, I should have known he was up to no good. He had doubtless been lying in wait, watching me for hours as I pumped my way up the mountain. He'd probably even snickered to himself as he plotted ways to embarrass me. All the time, I was easing the rifle loose from the handlebars, digging a shell from my pocket, and thumbing it into the rifle, while the deer danced and clowned and cut up all around me, smirking the whole while. The instant I jacked the shell into the chamber, however, he stepped behind a tree. While I darted to one side, rifle at the ready. He moved to the other side of the tree and stuck his head out just enough that I could see him feigning a yawn. As I moved up close to the tree, he did a rapid tiptoe to another tree. I heard him snort with laughter. Now, for a whole hour, he toyed with me in this manner, enjoying himself immensely. Then I fooled him, or at least so I thought at the time. I turned and started walking in a dejected manner back toward my bike, still watching his hiding place out of the corner of my eye. He stuck his head out to see what I was up to. I stepped behind a small bush as if to tie my shoe. Then, swiftly I turned, drew a bead on his head, and fired. Down he went. I was still congratulating myself on a fine shot when I rushed up to his crumpled form. Strangely, I could not detect a bullet hole in his head, but one of his antlers was chipped, and I figured the slug had struck there with sufficient force to do him in. No matter, I said to myself, I have at last got my first deer. And I pictured in my mind the joyous welcome I would receive when I came home hauling in 100 or so pounds of venison. Then I discovered my knife had fallen out of its sheath during my frantic pursuit of the deer. Instant anguish. The question that nagged my waking moments for years afterwards was, did the deer know that I had dropped my knife? Had I only interpreted it correctly, the answer to that question was written all over the buck's face. He was still wearing that stupid smirk. Well, I told myself, what I'll do is I'll just load him on my bike, haul him down to the lunatic hunters camp, and borrow a knife from them to dress him out with. I thought this plan particularly good in that it would allow me to offer those smart Alecs a few tips on deer hunting. Loading the buck on the bike was much more of a problem than I had expected. When I draped him crosswise over the platform on the rear fender, his head and front quarters dragged on one side and his rear quarters on the other. Several times as I lifted and pulled and hauled, I thought I heard a giggle, but when I looked around, nobody was there. It was during one of these pauses that a brilliant idea occurred to me. With Herculean effort, I managed to arrange the deer so that he was sitting astraddle of the platform, his forelegs splayed out forward and his head drooping down. I lashed his front feet to the handlebars, one on each side. Then I slid up onto the seat ahead of him, draped his head over my right shoulder, and pushed off. I must admit that riding a bike with a deer on behind was a good deal more difficult than I had anticipated. Even though I pressed down on the brake for all I was worth, our wobbling descent was much faster than I would have liked. The road was narrow, twisting, and filled with ruts and large rocks, with breathtaking drop-offs on either side. When we came hurtling around a sharp, high bend on the hunter's camp, I glanced down. Even from that distance, I could see their eyes pop and their jaws sag as they caught sight of us. Now, what worried me most was the hill that led down to the camp. As we arrived at the crest of it, my heart, liver, and kidneys all jumped in unison. The hill was much steeper than I had remembered. It was at this point that the buck gave a loud, startled snort. My first deer had either just regained consciousness or been shocked out of his pretense of death at the sight of the plummeting grade before us. We both tried to leap from the bike, but he was tied on and I was locked in the embrace of his front legs. When we shot past the hunter's camp, well, I was too occupied at the moment to get a good look at their faces. I heard afterwards that a game warden found them several hours later, frozen in various postures and still staring at the road in front of their camp. The report was probably exaggerated, however, game wardens being little better than hunters at sticking to the truth. I probably would have been able to get the bike stopped sooner and with fewer injuries to myself if I had had enough sense to tie down the deer's hind legs. As it was, he started flailing wildly about with them and somehow managed to get his hooves on the pedals. By the time we had reached the bottom of the mountain, he not only had the hang of pedaling, but was showing considerable talent for it. He also seemed to be enjoying himself immensely. We zoomed up and down over the rolling foothills and into the bottomlands with the deer pedaling wildly and me shouting and cursing and trying to wrest control of the bike from him. At last he piled us up in the middle of a farmer's pumpkin patch. He tore himself loose from the bike and bounded into the woods, all the while making obscene gestures at me with his tail. I threw the rifle to my shoulder and got off one quick shot. I might have hit him too if it hadn't still been strapped to the bike. Now, I realize that is not the proper way to tell the first deer, but if it would help, maybe I can tell you about my second deer. Now, let me tell you, it was so big it could cradle a baby grand piano in its rack and shade a team of Belgian draft horses in its shadow at high noon. Honest, I wouldn't lie about a thing like that.
And now we would like to bring back Miss Edie Ted to do a second song, Just Be Held.
You out of nowhere, barely leaves you holding on. And when you're tired of fighting, chained by your control, you know there's freedom in surrender. Lay it down and let it go. So when you're on your knees and answers seem so far away, you're not alone. Stop holding on and just be held. Your world's not falling apart, it's falling into place. I'm on the throne. Stop holding on and just be held. Just be held. Just be held. If your eyes are on the storm, you'll wonder if I love you still. But if your eyes are on the cross, you know I always have and I always will. Not a tear is wasted. In time you'll understand. I'm painting beauty with the ashes. Your life is in my hands. So when you're on your knees and answers seem so far away, you're not alone. Stop holding on and just be held. Your world's not falling apart, it's falling into place. I'm on the throne. Stop holding on and just be held. Just be held. Just be held. So when you're on your knees and answers seem so far away, you're not alone. Stop holding on and just be held. Your world's not falling apart, it's falling into place. I'm on the throne. Stop holding on and just be held. Your world's not falling apart, it's falling into place. I'm on the throne. Stop holding on and just be held. Just be held.
Now we'd like to bring up a lady, and she's wrote these stories and she tells them, and they're really neat. But Miss Carla Beard, and she'll be doing Mrs. McCarnahan.
Good evening, I'm Margaret Carnahan and I teach math at Hamptonville High School. It has been an incredibly cold winter this winter, and we've really been feeling it, especially on Martin Luther King's birthday. Now, Hamptonville High School has school on Martin Luther King Day, and every teacher is expected to have a lesson that deals with Dr. King or the civil rights movement or social justice in some way. Now, the 7th grade social studies teacher was working with her students, hoping to get them to set up a community service project of some kind, maybe a nice anti-bullying campaign. She wanted the idea to come from them. One young man sitting over by the window said, "I want some more heat in this building. It's cold in here." Now, it's true that, like schools everywhere, Hamptonville has been feeling the pinch, and we're trying to economize. So we have turned down the heat another couple of degrees. Now, on Dr. King's birthday, it was very cold. And the young man's complaint was picked up all over the classroom. The social studies teacher saw her nice anti-bullying campaign going out the window. She said, well, we can't really just turn up the heat. It costs a lot of money to heat a school. And just then the bell rang, and the students left, and they came to my class. "Mrs. Carnahan, how much does it cost to heat the school?" Well, that wasn't exactly my lesson plan for the day. But we were calculating something. So we calculated the size of the school and how many cubic feet of air were involved, and we looked up some potential costs of gas and heating the building. One student found an estimate of how much a family could save by lowering their heat 2 degrees. We did a little reverse engineering and used that to estimate the cost of increasing the heat by 2 degrees throughout Hamptonville High School for 1 day. We estimated $470.42. Well, that was a substantial sub, and the students were quiet for a moment. And then DeMarco said, "We could raise that money." "The school board meets next week. We could take all this week, raise the money, and go to the school board meeting next Monday night and present them with the money and ask them if we could please have 2 degrees of heat for 1 day. Just like that, the idea caught on. Now, I tried to say that heating the school with a gas boiler is not quite the same as your furnace or your heat pump at home. You can't just turn it up for 1 day and then turn it back down. But these were 7th graders. They had an idea in their mind, and poof, off they went. The next day, a bunch of boys marched in. They had decorated coffee cans and pickle jars, and they were collecting donations. A group of girls had gotten busy. They had chosen a slogan, 2 for 1, 2 degrees for 1 day. They made T-shirts, bright glitter paint, 2 for 1, and they were selling them. Everyone was planning to wear their T-shirts on Friday. A couple of the first-year teachers even bought their T-shirts. Some of the girls had been wearing fleece blankets as fashion accessories. They had learned how to make them in their textiles class, and they decided that for this event, they would make and sell special fleece blankets. They sold out the first day. They had to go to Walmart that night and get more fleece, which they did. And by Friday, they had this enormous stack of fleece blankets, and everyone was wearing a fleece blanket to school. On Friday, they had a count. They had raised $513.17. Now, ordinarily, our principal, Mr. Seymour, would have put a stop to this. But he was attending a principals conference in Orlando. And our assistant principal, unfortunately, was home with the flu. So really, the school was being run by our office secretary, Mrs. Griffin. She pretty much runs the school anyway. But she wasn't going to be the one to say to the students, you can't just turn a gas boiler up and down like your furnace at home. She just smiled and nodded as the students were enthusiastically telling her what they were doing. And then she very quietly made a phone call to the president of the school board. So when the students arrived on Monday night, it was quite the spectacle. First, we had several students walking in with very heavy coffee cans and pickle jars, followed by all the girls in their shirts. Some of the glitter had fallen off by this point, but it was still quite colorful. And several students in fleece blankets. The boys had tied theirs around their neck and wore them like capes. And once again, DeMarco stood up to speak to the school board. Everyone presented their coffee cans and pickle jars, put them on the table. DeMarco said, we're cold. Could we please have 2 degrees of heat for one day? And there was much applause from the audience. The school board members all just kind of looked at one another. And then our school board president, Charlotte Ruiz, began to speak. She said, you've worked very hard on this. I hope you've learned a lot about teamwork. I hope you've learned a lot about setting goals and working to achieve your goals. These are skills that will serve you well. But a gas boiler doesn't work like a furnace at home. We can't just turn the heat up and then turn it back down. And she paused. And with all the frustration of a 13-year-old, DeMarco stood up and said, well, what are you going to do with all that money? We just gave you that money. What are you going to do? We're cold. And Mrs. Ruiz said, I'd like you to meet someone. And she pointed to Max Campbell in the front row. He stood up. He was a shy, quiet man. And this was the first time in his life that he'd ever had to address a group of very disappointed 13-year-olds. So he took a deep breath. But then he explained that the gas company, the same gas company that provided gas for the boilers at the school, also heated homes all throughout the community. And they had what's called an angel fund. This fund helped provide heat for people who had trouble paying their heating bills so that no one would go cold. He quietly said to the students, would you like to donate your money to the Angel Fund and help people not be cold in their homes at night? There was a pause. Slowly, the 13-year-old heads began to nod. And eventually, everyone was in agreement. And then one of the school board members spoke up and said, do you have any more of those fleece blankets? Well, yes, they did have a few, and she offered to purchase all of them. And she said, I will donate them to the Angel Fund. And every person who gets help from the Angel Fund can also receive a blanket. And they will know that they've received help from Hamptonville High School. Oh, there was much cheering, there was much applause, and a great deal of happiness spread throughout the room. The students left pleased. It's a hard lesson to learn, that sometimes you work really hard and you don't get what you want. But it's good to learn that sometimes you succeed in ways you never anticipated. Thank you.
And that will be the end of our performances. We very much would like to thank you for being here with us and Imagine This. We'd like to thank all our performers for their contributions. And of course, we'd like to thank our studio audience. See you next month.